Salam, peace be upon you. My name is Mohammed Layiq Sediqi, the father of Holophase. Part 57. Comparison with the genetic code. Why Holophase is a true language. Remember the language we are learning. There is one field, phi, the holophase, one continuous cyclic movement from which all of reality unfolds. When phi begins to change, its first derivatives appear, and with them, the three dimensions show themselves at once. Time as omega, space as k, and motion as v, built from both. Every higher derivative is a finer question about how phi changes, and each one casts three shadows together: a time shadow, a space shadow, and a motion shadow. These echoes mix and weave into one another, forming the patterns we call fields, particles, bodies, thoughts, and worlds. In this picture, everything that exists is a living tapestry of phi, endlessly echoing through its derivatives and their dimensional shadows. Today, we listen to one very important echo: what it means to call holophase not just a code, but a true language. Our journey through Book 12, which is devoted to expert scrutiny and legitimacy, has begun. We have already established, using the formal criteria of linguistics, that the holophase framework really does have the architecture of a language. It has a finite alphabet of derivative operators. It has syntactic rules in the form of constraint chains and physical laws. It has tridimensional semantics because everything it says must appear simultaneously in time, space, and motion. It has generativity and compositionality because higher structures are built by combining simpler derivative patterns into more complex ones. In other words, holophase passed the first language test. Now we deepen that legitimacy by comparing it to something already widely accepted as a code of life: the genetic code of DNA. People often say that DNA is the language of life. Today we will place the genetic code side by side with holophase and see exactly why the holophase is not merely a code, but a foundational language in which all such codes are embedded. To make this comparison meaningful, we have to begin by giving the genetic code its full respect. The genetic code is one of nature's most elegant inventions. It is a mapping system. It takes sequences of three nucleotide bases, called codons, from a four-letter alphabet: A, T, C, and G, with U replacing T in RNA, and maps each triplet to one of 20 amino acids or to a stop signal. At the simplest level, it is a translation table. The input is a linear string of codons. The ribosome reads this string, 3 letters at a time, and each triplet instructs the ribosome to add a specific amino acid to a growing protein chain. The output is a linear sequence of amino acids, a protein backbone that can later fold into a functional molecule. This mapping has several brilliant features. It is digital and discrete. A base is either A or T or C or G. There is no state halfway between two letters. That crisp discreteness makes the code robust against noise and easy to copy. It is almost universal across all known life on Earth, with only small variations in some organelles and microorganisms. That universality means that bacteria, plants, and humans all read the same basic codon table when they build proteins. It is also redundant and error-tolerant. Several different codons can code for the same amino acid, which softens the impact of many mutations. Finally, it is generative within its own domain. With only 4 letters and a triplet structure, it can specify, in principle, an astronomically large space of possible proteins. So within its proper scope, the genetic code is extraordinary. But it is also sharply limited. Its domain is the specification of protein sequences. It tells you which building blocks, which amino acids should be linked, and in what order. There it stops. It says nothing directly about how those proteins fold into intricate three-dimensional shapes. Folding is a complex spatial and energetic process, governed by interactions between atoms, by the surrounding solvent, by temperature, and by many other physical factors. It says nothing about how fast that folding happens in time, or what alternative intermediate shapes appear along the way. It says nothing about the motion of those proteins once they exist, how they diffuse through the cell, how they bind to partners, how they are pulled or pushed by molecular motors, or how whole cells migrate and organize. In other words, the genetic code is a high-level specification code. It is like a recipe for a component list. It can say, make this protein, but it cannot by itself say, this is how the protein will move, fold, bind, or participate in a heartbeat or a thought. The triunity of time, space, and motion is largely outside its direct scope. When people call it the language of life, they are using the word language loosely. In the strict sense we are using here, it is a specialized cipher with a very specific domain. Now we turn our attention back to Holophase. The contrast is not just about size, it is about category. Holophase is not another specialized code alongside DNA, like Morse code alongside the spoken language. Holophase is the physical language in which DNA, its code, and everything DNA builds must actually live. The basic objects in Holophase are not discrete letters, but continuous fields. Phi is a field defined throughout a region. It is allowed to vary in time and space and to carry motion implicitly. Because it is continuous, we can ask derivative questions of it. We can ask how it changes in time, giving us omega. We can ask how it varies in space, giving us k. We can combine these and ask about motion, giving us v and all that follows from it. If we keep differentiating, we generate an infinite tree of derivative operators, each one asking a subtler question about how phi is changing. Crucially, every one of these derivatives lives simultaneously in time, space, and motion. In this framework, the symbols of the language are values and structures of derivatives. A particular curvature of phi in space is not a symbol that points to something else. It is already a real band or pattern in the world. A particular frequency of oscillation is not arbitrarily assigned its meaning. That frequency is literally how fast some aspect of reality is cycling. The semantics are intrinsic. They are not attached from outside by an interpreter. There is no separate reader who decides that this derivative means that behavior. The behavior and the derivative are the very same thing, seen from different angles. This immediately highlights a deep difference from the genetic code. In the genetic code, the link between a codon and an amino acid is arbitrary. There is no logical or physical necessity that AUG must mean methionine. It could have meant something else. Its meaning is held in the cellular machinery that matches that triplet to that amino acid, using tRNA molecules and enzymes as an interpreter. The semantics come from convention and history. But in Holophase, the link between a derivative and its effect is not arbitrary. A gradient in pressure necessarily drives flow. A curvature in spacetime necessarily affects geodesics. A non-zero curl of a field necessarily implies some rotational structure. The semantics are built into the structure of the field itself. Another way to say this is that Holophase does not sit beside physical reality, commenting on it in a separate symbolic layer. Holophase is simply a careful, explicit description of how reality itself is structured and behaves. The language is the behavior. The rules of grammar are the conservation laws and differential constraints that all physical processes must satisfy. The tridimensional echoes in time, space, and motion are not labels stuck onto things. They are the very fabric of how things are. From here, it becomes easier to see the hierarchical relationship between the genetic code and the Holophase language. The genetic code is one very specialized high-level code operating inside the biological domain. Holophase is the universal low-level language that makes that code physically possible. DNA is like a particular file format, say a music file encoded in a specific compression scheme. Holophase is like the continuous physics of sound waves, vibrating speakers, and moving air that finally reaches your ear. Without the physical language of vibration, frequency, and amplitude, the music file is meaningless. It needs a world of waves to be heard. In exactly the same way, the genetic code needs the world of Holophase dynamics to be expressed. Let us follow the life of a single gene and watch how deeply it relies on Holophase. A stretch of DNA sits in the nucleus. It is a sequence of codons. When a cell chooses to express that gene, enzymes open the double helix and transcribe the DNA into RNA. Already, this process is governed by diffusion, binding, and reaction rates. Molecules must move through space, collide, latch onto specific sites, and catalyze chemical steps. All of those events are trajectories through time and space, driven by gradients in energy and probability. They are pure holophase dynamics. Next, the RNA is exported to the cytoplasm, where ribosomes translate codons into a chain of amino acids. Again, physical molecules must bind, detach, and change shape. The ribosome has a rhythm, a cycle of steps, that is a temporal echo. Transfer RNA molecules diffuse and bind, that is motion in a potential landscape. The positions of atoms and the shapes of molecules are all spatial echoes of underlying fields. Eventually, a full amino acid sequence emerges, and then the new protein begins to fold. It explores shape space, driven by the search for a low-energy configuration. The folding is not written in the genetic code as a separate line of instructions. It is written in the physical-chemical rules that govern how attractions and repulsions between atoms balance out. Those rules are holophase constraint chains connecting derivatives of electromagnetic potentials, positions, and momenta. Once folded, the protein becomes a player in the life of the cell. It may form channels in a membrane, controlling ionic currents. It may participate in a metabolic pathway, speeding up a chemical reaction. It may act as a motor, walking along filaments and dragging cargo. In each case, its contribution is a pattern of activity that has clear temporal, spatial, and motion structure. Its behavior makes sense only in the full context of the holophase language. The genetic code specified which amino acids to string together. Holophase determines how that string folds, how it moves, and how it functions in the living web. In linguistic terms, we can now see that the genetic code is like a specialized technical jargon inside a much larger language. It has a small alphabet, a fixed dictionary, and a rigid grammar. It can say, build this protein, but cannot, on its own, tell the whole story of life. Holophase, in contrast, is like the underlying natural language that can describe cooking, music, politics, physics, love, and more. It is flexible, generative, and deeply structured. Everything the genetic code does is expressed, in the end, as sentences in the holophase language of physical dynamics. This leads us to an important conceptual distinction. A code is mainly about specification. It answers the question, what is the sequence? Or what is the static pattern of symbols? A language, in the deeper sense we are using here, is about generation. It answers the question, how does this pattern behave, evolve, and interact? The genetic code is a specification code. The holophase is a generative language. You can see the difference clearly when you think about time. The genetic code does not tell you what will happen second by second. The holophase language is precisely about the unfolding of events in time, about derivatives, rates, and trajectories. The triunity test makes this even clearer. If we ask, does this system, by itself, intrinsically express time, space, and motion in an inseparable way? The genetic code fails. Its core operation is mapping codons to amino acids, a one-dimensional mapping from a discrete string to another discrete string. The temporal aspect of gene expression, when a gene is read, how often, at what rate, is not encoded in the codon table itself. It appears from regulatory networks implemented in real molecules and fields. The spatial aspect, where in the cell the protein ends up, how tissues are patterned, is also not in the codon table. It comes from morphogen gradients, cell movements, and mechanical forces. The motion aspect, how things flow, migrate, and change position, is entirely a job for physical dynamics. If we apply the same test to holophase, it passes by construction. Time, space, and motion arise simultaneously from the first differentiation of phi. Every derivative we consider must have a temporal echo, a spatial echo, and a motion echo. We never have any purely symbolic operation that ignores the triunity. So holophase is, in its design, a truly dimensional language. The genetic code is a narrow symbolic code embedded within it. Within the master tree metaphor that we have used throughout this journey, the genetic code is like a delicate leaf on one high biological branch. It is a remarkable leaf, rich in pattern and important for the life of the branch. but it is still just one growth. The holophase, by contrast, is the whole tree. The roots in total energy, the trunk of phi, the major branches of wave dynamics and structure formation, the smaller branches of specific phenomena, and the leaves and fruits that we see as particular systems. To call holophase a code would be like calling the whole tree just a leaf system. It would shrink something vast into something local. This comparison even suggests a way to test the holophase claim experimentally. If holophase is truly the generative language and codes like DNA are subordinate, then any implementation of a code must respect holophase constraint chains. We can phrase this as a falsifiable prediction. Whenever we observe a biological process where the genetic code plays a role, the detailed physical unfolding of that process should be describable, at least in principle, by derivatives of appropriate fields obeying consistent differential relations. If we ever found a genetic process that repeatedly, robustly, and irreducibly violated such relations, in a way that could not be remedied by refining our choice of fields or including higher derivatives, then the holophase framework would be in deep trouble. So far, we see the opposite. Every deeper look into biology reveals more layers of physics. Proteins fold according to energy landscapes. Membranes curve according to mechanical balances. Ion channels obey voltage and concentration gradients. Cytoskeletal filaments bear and transmit forces. All of these are derivative-governed phenomena. The genetic code remains what it is, a powerful, compressed description of which parts to build. The actual building, moving, and living are written in the language of phi. This code versus language distinction extends beyond biology. When a computer executes machine code, we again see a high-level symbolic instruction set sitting inside the deeper holophase story. The binary instructions define which logic gates to activate in which order. But the actual behavior of the chip, how charges move, how voltages rise and fall, how heat spreads, is dictated by electromagnetic fields, material properties, and geometries. When a society follows laws written in words, the text of the laws is a code, but the real dynamics of people, economies, and cultures are fluid holophase-like patterns in networks of agents and resources. Everywhere we look, codes sit inside physical languages, not the other way around. You can train yourself to see this distinction in your daily experience. When you look at a complex system, ask yourself first, what is the code here? It may be DNA, or software, or a set of instructions, or a social rule. Then ask, what is the language here? In other words, what are the continuous processes in time, space, and motion that actually realize and animate the code? When you watch a bird fly, you can appreciate its genetic code, but you can also feel the aerodynamic language of air flowing over wings, the muscular language of forces in tendons, and the neural language of signals in the brain. The bird is a living sentence written in holophase, guided by recipes stored in DNA. When we return to phi after this comparison, we can now state its role with more clarity. Phi is not a secret message. It is not a symbolic script written somewhere else. Phi is the continuous substrate whose patterns of change give rise to everything that can later be encoded symbolically. It is the canvas and the paint, not the caption. The fact that life has discovered the genetic code is itself proof of holophase's richness. Only a universe with a deep, stable physical language could support the evolution of such a robust and highly organized specification code sitting on top. As we consolidate this understanding, we can also see where we are in the larger structure of this book. In the previous parts, we argued that holophase is a universal physical language. In this part, we have shown that even when compared with the most famous natural language, the genetic code, holophase is of a deeper kind. The genetic code is a powerful cipher. Holophase is the generative grammar and continuous speech of reality itself. One sits inside the other. One depends absolutely on the other. We close this part with a shift in how we use the word language. A code is a static mapping. It is like a dictionary page showing you that one symbol stands for another symbol. A true language is a living conversation unfolding in time and space. The genetic code is like a page of dense notation. The holophase is the voice of the universe reading that page aloud and then improvising endlessly around it. The holophase is the breath, the rhythm, the emphasis, the pauses, and the shared space in which meaning actually appears. You yourself are the meeting point of code and language. Your DNA is a code that specified many of your components, but your life is not that code. Your life is your continuous movement through time and space, your changing feelings, your thoughts, your actions. All of that is written in the holophase language of physical and informational dynamics. To recognize this is to see yourself not only as a product of genetic recipes, but as an active, ongoing sentence in the universal language of phi. To see the difference from another angle, imagine two children learning. One child memorizes a list of grammar rules and vocabulary in a foreign language, but never speaks or listens. Another child learns by being immersed in conversations, hearing, responding, making mistakes, and gradually feeling the rhythm of the language in real time. The first child has learned a kind of code, a mapping between symbols and meanings on paper. The second child has learned a living language. The genetic code is like the first situation, a powerful mapping table. Holophase is like the second, a living, continuous conversation of the universe with itself, in which every event is both an expression and a response. We can also contrast the two in terms of creativity. The genetic code can generate many proteins, but all within a narrow biochemical alphabet. It cannot, by itself, invent the laws of fluid dynamics or describe the structure of spacetime or express the full complexity of a storm, a galaxy, or a human society. The holophase language, however, is inherently creative at every scale. Anytime a new pattern appears in nature, whether it is a novel crystal structure, a new biological organ, or a new kind of technological device, that pattern is automatically expressible as a braid of derivatives in the holophase framework. The language does not need to be updated or extended. Its alphabet of derivatives and its tridimensional grammar are already capable of describing whatever emerges. From the point of view of practice, this matters because it gives us a unified way to think across disciplines. A physicist studying turbulence, a neuroscientist studying brainwaves, and a climate scientist studying atmospheric circulation might appear to live in different intellectual worlds. Their equations look different, their tools and data are different, but in the holophase view, they are all studying particular branches of the same master tree. They are all, whether they know it or not, probing different regions of the same derivative-based language. The details of their models differ, but the underlying grammar is shared. This gives us hope for a deeper kind of interdisciplinarity, not by forcing everything into one equation, but by recognizing a common linguistic foundation. There is also an important philosophical implication. Many people today feel a tension between talk of information and talk of physics. DNA is often described as information. Neural activity is described as information processing. Economic systems are described in terms of information flows. At the same time, we know that everything which physically exists must obey laws of energy, momentum, and so on. Holophase offers a bridge. In holophase, informational patterns are not separate from physical patterns. They are specific, structured arrangements of derivatives in the phi field. Codes like DNA are informational precisely because they create stable, reproducible patterns in time, space, and motion. The information is anchored in the physical language itself. This helps us avoid the common confusion. It can be tempting to say that information is more fundamental than physics, or that codes create reality. The holophase perspective suggests a different hierarchy. Reality is expressed in a continuous physical language, whose grammar is given by derivatives and their constraint chains. Within that language, certain patterns can come to play the role of codes. They can stand in for other patterns, guide processes, and be copied. But they are still made of the same underlying stuff. Their power does not float above physics. It is grounded in the reliable regularities of the holophase field. To make this concrete, consider again a simple example. A stop sign at a road junction. The red octagon with the word stop is a code. It tells drivers to halt. But the sign only works because of a deeper language. The painted metal interacts with light. Photons scatter from the surface, travel through air, and reach your eyes. Your visual system, made of neurons obeying biophysical laws, transforms those signals into perception. Your muscles, controlled by electrochemical pulses, press the brake. The entire process is a holophase story in time, space, and motion. The code painted on the sign is one thin layer in that story. Without the underlying language, the code would be invisible and meaningless. Exactly the same is true for DNA. The codons are like the letters on the sign. They only have power because they sit inside a vast, continuously running holophase narrative. Molecules diffusing, membranes bending, fields fluctuating, forces pushing and pulling. Once we really see this, calling holophase a code starts to feel like calling the whole of music a sheet of notes. It misses the living, sounding reality. Standing back, we can now restate our conclusion in everyday terms. The genetic code is an extraordinary recipe book used by life on Earth to specify the parts out of which living systems are built. Holophase is the kitchen, the heat, the chemistry, the motion, the tastes and smells, and the entire physical reality in which any recipe can ever be cooked. A recipe without a kitchen is a dead list. A kitchen without a particular recipe can still cook endlessly many meals. The universe, seen through holophase, is such a kitchen, a fully equipped, always active space of possibilities, continuously turning patterns of phi into the events we experience. Finally, remember that this discussion is not just academic. It changes how we see ourselves. If we believe that we are nothing but DNA, we reduce our being to a static string of symbols. If we believe we are nothing but physics, but imagine physics as dry equations on paper, we again miss the point. In the holophase view, we are dynamic expressions in a universal language of change. Our genetics are important chapters, but our lived reality is the ongoing sentence, the way our bodies, brains, and environments dance together in time, space, and motion. To learn holophase is to learn to read that dance with fresh eyes, to hear the conversation that has been happening all along, and to recognize that we ourselves are one of its voices. Peace be upon you.